Blog Talk Radio.
Carol the Coach. Sex, love, and relationships. We talk about it here.
Carol the Coach. Compassion with contemporary relevance.
I am a psychotherapist. I can be your personal life coach, and I can help you with your issues. There are no problems too small or too big. You can talk about anything.
Speaker, columnist, radio TV host, and commentator. Carol the Coach brings messages of wellness and empowerment within reach of everyday people every day.
Almost 5 years ago, I lost my soulmate in an accident. He was killed in a plane crash. Life just, for me, has seemed to stop.
There are groups all over the city. I teach one. It is a specific way to start thinking so that you shift how you see the world, which then shifts your energy, and then you feel better and you actually see things differently.
Carol the Coach. Always available, too, at carolthecoach.com.
Now, I've got Russell on the line.
I'm 47 years old. I'm a truck driver. I'm married. I have a wife in San Francisco.
Okay.
I haven't been home in 6 months. My thing is, I don't know if I have a sex addiction or what the problem is. Why do I want what I can't have? And as soon as I can have it, I don't want it anymore.
You're right on target when you say, I don't know if I have a sexual addiction. Well, guess what? Yes, you do. And you know what? That's my specialty, Russell, so you're at the right place. Continue.
I meet women online, and I'm in a different part of the country. I travel all 48 states, so I love sex.
I hear self-esteem issues. You never felt good enough, and you didn't feel like you were getting what you should have then, and you're reenacting that now. Do you want to change that about yourself?
You get what you need. Oh.
And I am Carol Jurgensen-Sheets, a.k.a. Carol the Coach, and I am so glad to be with you. Hope that everybody is doing well out there. It gets kind of confusing after a long weekend. I seem to get more emails about problems at home. And I have to admit, a man by the name of Eric contacted me, and he said, hey, Carol, I'm definitely a sex addict, and I'm trying to get as many resources and help as possible, looking for more resources and contacts to support my schedule. I'm military and have a wife and 2 kids and can't really make evening 12-step meetings. I can't seem to find a sponsor who will actually answer the phone. I listened to your first podcast, and I need your advice. Well, Eric, here's what I would say to you. Keep listening to the show, because I give a lot of tips and a lot of advice at the beginning of the show, and obviously when we're talking with the experts. I have quite a bit to say myself. In the meantime, you say, I'm trying to get as many resources and help as possible. Well, the first thing I would do is, no matter what book you're reading, I would get the workbook, Facing the Shadows, because you can start to do work in this workbook that will help you to identify what you'd need to do next in your recovery program. And I'm a big believer in Patrick Carnes. You know I was trained by him, and I highly recommend that you get that workbook. Again, for anybody out there listening, it's called Facing the Shadows. It's the number one text that I use with my clients. Hey, you know what I do recommend is the Recovery Start Kit. And that is a fairly pricey 140 days of getting on the bandwagon of recovery. And you can contact me at carolthecoach.com, and I can send you one of these kits. I tend to sell them less expensively than Amazon or other places because I really want you to get the help. I'm willing to sell it at my cost. So it's amazing. It's a little over $300, and it will get you going with meditations, with work, with a personal index, craziness index that you need to fill out. It helps you to understand about eroticized rage. It is amazing in terms of all the ways that it gets you catapulted into recovery. Now, of course, you said that you don't have time because you have a wife and 2 kids, and you really can't make evening 12-step meetings. Well, you and I both know that more than likely there are meetings at 7 a.m. before you go to work, at noon when you're taking a break, or in the evening. I first and foremost always recommend face-to-face meetings. That's what I do. I think they're by far the most beneficial, and it's where you can really get to know the guys and identify who would make a good sponsor. You got to see that it's a good fit. I'm always amazed when people come in, and I get this, and they go, I don't know how to pick a sponsor. Well, first and foremost, if you're doing 12-step meetings, you need to pick people that you admire, that seem to have good recovery, that you like what they say, and what they say makes sense to you. So that's what I would recommend you do. And I'm sorry that you've had so much trouble. You can't find a sponsor who will actually answer the phone. It sounds like you've tried. Now, I don't know if that means you've asked somebody to be your temporary or regular sponsor, or if you're just calling guys off the cuff to ask them to be a sponsor, and you know, they don't know who they're getting. They don't know who they're getting, so they don't answer the phone. They want to see who's going to leave a message. And let's face it, there's a lot of people out there, and I'm wondering if this is you, Eric, that you call, but when they don't answer, you hang up. That is not going to get you anywhere. But in the meantime, if you really are in a city that doesn't offer 12-step meetings face-to-face, then you've got to go to saa-recovery.org and look for telemeetings. And there are plenty of people there that will help to be your sponsor. I've never met anybody who couldn't get a sponsor online. If indeed you really can't get yourself to a few face-to-face meetings a week, and I recommend not just 1, but 2 or 3 for the new person who is a sex addict. See, I'm a Rottweiler. I'm not somebody that says this process is easy, but I promise you when you work it works. So you invest in the work that you need to do, and you're going to be able to manage this addiction and get to feeling better about yourself. Now, I've got to ask you, have you gone to sexhelp.com? Because sexhelp.com has CSATs, Certified Sexual Addictions Therapists, in your zip code, hopefully, that can help you. And if you're living in a military town, they probably take TRICARE. If they don't, there are plenty of therapists who do. Now, I just said that, and you know, I got to say, a lot of CSATs don't take any kind of insurance, so I shouldn't have said plenty. I take insurance. But the thing is, you can't work with me unless you're going to come to Indianapolis. You know, I do consultation. I see people on Zoom. I see people for consultation with Skype. I do phone coaching. But that is not covered by insurance. And so, you know, if you need somebody to just consult with you a couple of times and you're willing to pay cash, I'm your girl. We'll get you to the right people in the right places. But this is not why I do the show. I do the show to educate and inform you and to show you that there are resources, Eric, out there, just especially for you. And if you don't work all these tools, you're probably not going to get the help that you deserve and the help that will make you the best family man. You said you have 2 kids, and you want to be the kind of guy that can look your wife in the eyes and empathize, reassure, validate, and connect with her. And so I'm hoping that you do the hard work. You've heard me talk about the 10 tools. If you don't know what those 10 tools are, go to YouTube, Sex Help with Carol the Coach. Now, I realize there are some parts of the population that listen to me that have blocked YouTube. It might be a gateway for acting out. But then ask your wife to go to YouTube. Ask your girlfriend, ask your mother, ask your brother, I don't care who you ask, but say, hey, get me on YouTube and go to Sex Help with Carol the Coach, and I have their partner and sex addict information. 8, 10, 12, at most 15-minute clips that can help teach you life skills and can assist you in changing your life. And that is my promise to you, too, that if you work on this diligently, if you read your meditation books, if you pray, if you meditate, if you go to a CSAT, if you get yourself into a sexual addiction group, if you go to 12-step meetings, if you get a sponsor, if you do the 12-step work, if you get filters, if you get polygraph tests, if you do everything that helps to hold you accountable, you will learn how to manage this disease. I promise you. That is my promise to you. You know, they say therapists should never make promises because they can't guarantee they can keep it. But I have never met a man or a woman who has utilized all the tools and not had the life that they deserve. And I'm a life coach, so I always, say create the life you deserve. And initially you have to create it with a lot of hard work. But again, when you work it, it works. So I'm going to ask you, Eric, you know what you need to do. Now get on it and please don't make excuses. You can do it. I promise you, you can do it. Okay. I am Carol Jurgensen-Sheets. I've already given you a little plug about my YouTube. You can go to my website, Sex Help with Carol the Coach, and get some information that you need. Every week, I bring you experts in the field that have specific niches that really can make a difference in your life. And tonight I've got Jessica Levith, and she says that she has seen a lot of problematic sexual behaviors that stem from sexualized anger. You know, that kind of philosophy, I hate you, and that's so hot. Well, sexualized anger is the fusion of anger and eroticism based on an arousal template laid down early in life. And so Jessica is definitely going to help us to understand, what is the term sexualized anger and how is that different from eroticized rage? Dr. Patrick Carnes talks about eroticized rage. And so she's going to help us know what the difference is. And she says there's very little written about sexualized anger using kind of a non-forensic lens. But there are many who struggle with insecure attachments, and they don't have anywhere really to explore unhealthy pieces of eroticism. And she wants you to understand more about that so you can cultivate a healthier and exciting sexuality. Now, Jess is a marriage and family therapist, and she's been trained by the Society for the Advancement of Sexual Health. We call that SASH. And SASH also trains clinicians to be certified therapists in sexual addiction and sexual problematic behaviors. And so they're another great place to look for therapists who know what they're doing in terms of treating both men, women, and couples struggling with problematic sexual behaviors. Jess also works with emotional dependency, and she is one of us. When I say that, she's an APSAT. She is a certified clinician who works with partner trauma, and she is a specialist with partners. So as you can see, she has been able to address these issues from all perspectives. That makes her really well-rounded. And she travels around the country providing lectures on affect regulation. Those are your feelings. What do you do when you can't manage your anger or your sadness or your depression, your fears? And she is working on attachment issues. She writes articles. And you can visit her website at www.east-baytherapy.com. So I really want to welcome Jess to the show because she's got an exciting topic for us tonight, one that we don't talk about often. So, Jess, welcome to Sex Help with Carol the Coach.
Hi, Carol.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. That was quite an intro. That's going to be hard to live up to.
Oh, come on. I know who you are. I know what you do, and this is going to be easy. And I know our listening audience has some confusion about all this because they don't understand eroticized rage. They definitely don't understand how that is different from sexualized anger. And so can you talk a little bit about the difference between sexualized anger and eroticized rage?
Sure. So I use the phrase sexualized anger instead of what many are familiar with, the term eroticized rage, because reading the research on this and specifically Dr. Patrick Carnes came out with this article in 2013 on eroticized rage. And in the clinical examples, there seem to be many different types and degrees of anger, as well as trauma discussed. And the term eroticized rage kept bringing up this idea of a perpetrator, someone deeply, deeply pathological, while some of the examples given seem to be a different kind of anger, or if not perhaps anger at all, or rather just a trauma that was being relived. So I found sexualized anger to be more inclusive of the whole spectrum of anger instead of just this end of the spectrum of rage.
Okay, and so the normal sex addict who may feel a lot of sexualized anger, what do they look like? What are some of the behaviors? And when do you know that you're working with somebody that you need to explore this concept?
So I would say, this could show up in sex addicts. It can also show up in other problematic sexual behaviors. I think that I really start looking at this as an issue when either it's brought to my attention by the client themselves, when it's become dystonic, meaning it's in line with what their morals and values are, because I keep in mind that there is a wide range of healthy sexuality. And, I think that people can sexualize anger in a healthy way during role play, just like they can sexualize other emotions, happiness, sadness, So I really go with what the client is presenting to me and reporting. Is it impairing their social, emotional, occupational functioning? Are they in legal trouble? Are they, really, I try to follow the client's lead on this, and I don't treat offenders. That's a whole separate realm.
Absolutely. So again, what I hear you saying is that couples may get together and there is aggressive behavior or rough behavior or some anger demonstrated in sexuality, and that is not necessarily problematic.
It is problematic if, for example, you've got a couple coming together and there's a lot of anger and, just unaddressed, lying beneath the surface, and one of the partners is not okay with this. If it's consensual and they're both agreeing to having, almost an excitement about like role-playing anger and getting to know each other, that's different. That's see anything inherently wrong with that. I think if one of the people is being hurt and not okay with the situation, then there's a problem.
Okay. And I would agree with you 100%. We as clinicians, you and I both believe this, we're not here to pathologize sexual behavior that's mutual, that is erotic, regardless of how we feel about that stuff. I mean, clearly, if somebody is role-playing bondage, that is not necessarily a problem. There may be people that are offended by that, but if it's between two consensual adults, that is for them to deal with, not us. And we don't necessarily see that as bad. Would you agree?
Yes, I would agree. And I would say that, it may be just part of their love map, or what they find arousing. And that just because something is in your love map doesn't mean it's there for a bad reason, or that, it can't be a healthy sexual thing. So, yeah.
So then again, when you hear the term sexualized anger, give us some examples of what that looks like.
Okay. Let's see. So I work with some women in the entertainment field, and they are dancers, and they dance for money, and they take off their clothes. And some of the women that I work with have absolutely no problem with this, totally empowered by it, and make their money, and everything is fine, And then I have other women that during their dancing, they find a lot of power over the clients, and they also find that it doesn't feel healthy to them, like this amount of power, just wanting power over another human being while they're dancing and knowing that they have control. It bothers them. And then it also leads to them, maybe engaging in another addiction like drinking to increase the acting out sexually. So it's just this idea of you're having a sexuality, and it's involving a power play where they're not feeling good about it.
Got that. And so, let's use that same example. If that woman is into rough sex, is that pathological?
If the woman is into rough sex and she is totally on board with it, and there is another consenting adult who's totally on board with it, see anything inherently wrong with that. I think that can be a wonderful, healthy fun form of sexuality. I also think that in the example I gave, what was happening was the behavior that the woman is doing is dystonic. Something about that behavior is going against her internal moral compass. So somewhere it's not sitting well with her, this idea that she is taking off her clothes for money and having so much power perceived over the men that she's dancing for. That's the difference. So if you were to have a partner engaging in rough sex or bondage and they are fine with it, then there's nothing wrong with it. But if they're doing it and they're doing it to relive a trauma that they are not okay with, and that they're getting re-traumatized every single time they do it, that might be a problem. And that would be when they come in and say, hey, I want to talk about this.
Got it. And so as with most things, if issues are not a problem for you, and if it's mutual, and if it's mutually enjoyable and on some level meets an arousal template, and I have a lot of men and women, especially women that do like rough sex. That is their arousal template, and they don't really do very well with loving intimate sex. Right. For them, loving intimate sex is rough sex. Mm-hmm. And you're really saying we shouldn't pathologize them. If they're comfortable with that, we should allow that to be part of their relationship.
I would say, unless a woman is coming to me, if she is truly okay with having rough sex and finding and that her wires are crossed somehow, and that the loving slow, intimate sex is actually traumatizing for her, and she's okay with that, then fine. Now, if she has a problem with that and she wonders why she can't have this and it makes her sad that she is missing out on this other piece, I mean, she can still keep the bondage, but she might be missing out on a piece here that she wants. Now, if she's missing out on a piece and she comes to me and says, I really want to have slow, intimate, soft sex, but I'm terrified of it, then that is a challenge. You know, like that's something to work on and process for a full healthy sex, just for a full sexuality. And I also want to be clear that, you know, when people have rough sex and, you know, if you're into bondage, it's really important to make sure you're not intruding on someone else's boundaries, physical, emotional, spiritual, acting out. You know, that's a problem if you're doing that.
Absolutely. So now how did you get involved in, you know, the sexualized anger topic?
I got involved with it because I was doing a separate lecture, and then I was asked to just check out this topic, sexualized anger and eroticized rage, and I didn't find a lot of information. I found a lot more actually written on sexualized anger than on eroticized rage. And I find sexualized anger to be more of a term that I'm comfortable with because it's more of an umbrella term, whereas eroticized rage would be under the umbrella because it's one piece of it. And I just find it really fascinating because I find that a lot of times people are they're very quick to shut down anything that has any tinge of anger or violence in sexuality. It's incredibly taboo, you know, and very quickly gets pathologized and very quickly, you know, gets specifically, oh, well, it must be sexual addiction, you know. And I absolutely believe in sexual addiction, and I believe that people really, really struggle with it. And I also think that there are problematic sexual behaviors that aren't addictive, that it's not an addiction. So I'm somewhere in the middle in that school of thought that is deeply, deeply split at this point, where, you know, some people believe there's no such thing as sexual addiction, and others think that almost every problematic sexual behavior is somehow based in addiction.
Absolutely. And so you realized that a lot of people had misconceptions about it, and you decided that you wanted to talk more about it and educate others. So can you tell us, what do you believe causes that fusion between anger and sex?
Okay, so I wanted to give you what was in my notes. So I'm trying to catch up here. All right. So when I was reading Patrick Carnes' article, he really has a bunch of wonderful points that he makes in this article. And it is kind of the go-to article for eroticized rage. He says that there are three things that cause this fusion, this eroticized rage fusion. And the first is that anger occurs in high-risk and or frequent situations. So anger, just like fear, adds a neurochemical intensity to sexual experiences, and that heightens it. And that can begin to fuse anger and sex. Another thing is that anger is central to the scenarios and the belief system in the arousal template. So what arouses someone with sexualized anger or eroticized rage in that current moment is actually drawing momentum from historical experiences. So I give an example of an adult male I worked with that was a child, maybe 11 years old, and he was watching cartoons downstairs, and he would hear his mom upstairs having really rough, scary, abusive sex. And she was getting abused at the time. And so this child is sitting there and he's watching cartoons and he's really scared. And this is what he reported to me as an adult. And what he discovered was that if he masturbated and had an orgasm, it would actually calm him down. And so in that moment, he has fused, for the first time, orgasm and the relaxation that comes around that, and this idea of really abusive sex. And so, not to be surprised, when he came in to see me, he could not become aroused unless he was either watching violent porn or having violent sex.
Right, because he had actually formed his arousal template because it had fused this predisposition of painful, rough abuse and sex with his masturbatory need to kind of medicate and self-soothe him.
Yes, and so I do want to touch on that third thing that Patrick Carnes talked about, which is infusing anger in sex, is that anger acts as a sexual stimulus or a boost. And he talks about it doing this in 4 different ways, or general profiles. So these would be these are the different general profiles of how people get the boost from their angry sex or their sexualized anger. The first is power and restoration. So he talks about having, it's a way of, or an attempt to restore a sense of self, usually that involves some kind of abuse of power. So we're talking about someone that uses money or leverage on others. And you're reenacting this trauma of feeling powerless. And this is the most common profile, Dr. Carnes says. And you're acting out in a way in which the partner really has no control. This could look like secret affairs or online activity. And so you're trying to restore equality for yourself internally. That's the first profile. And there are 4. The second is humiliation, vengeance, and retaliation. This file, it's deep and profound psychological issues here, and its intention is to degrade and humiliate. These are perpetrators, and these are people that I actually do not see because you need very specialized training to work with perpetrators. Mm-hmm. The third one is perversion. Now, this is a very loaded word. And Carnes talks about it in the very literal definition. He recalls Robert Stoller, who wrote the book on perversion, called Perversion, the Erotic Form of Hatred. And it's this definition of getting pleasure in disapproval. So it's really getting culture back for its control and rigidity, and whatever you feel you're being judged on, you resent this, and you're going to lash out via out-of-the-box behaviors. Now, I really like to throw in again this idea that what one culture sees as, quote, perverse, another culture may consider quite reasonable, pleasurable, or important. And then the fourth
Can you give
thing
me an example of that, just for our listening audience that may not be able to make that connection?
What we were talking about, bondage. There are some very out there forms of bondage that people find quite pleasurable, and that they consider quite reasonable in the bondage community. But I would say that the average American, being in the West as we are, and being very pilgrimish, or
right.
I don't think that they would.
Puritanical, perhaps.
That's what I meant. I meant puritanical. Thank you. And they would not look kindly on that. They would say what? They would really be judgmental, harshly. So that's, and I think that some people, because they see such harsh judgment coming from places like the U.S. around sexuality, that they're turning around and they're giving a big middle finger, and they're going to, go explore even further.
Hmm. Now, let me ask you a controversial question. This is not meant to hijack you in any way. It's just a curiosity that I have. Because obviously in adolescent, college, and, a lot of young men are gravitating towards pornography that has to do with rape, has to do with bondage, has to do with gang banging, has to do with sadomasochistic stuff. And if I understand you correctly, we could say that sexualized anger it is a byproduct of what is arousing if it's mutually satisfying. And so when people look at that kind of pornography and they do become aroused by it, and there is a sense of mastery or control and anger, do you believe that that kind of pornography can then shape, here we go, adolescents, young adults, college-age students? My fear is that it will, and that we could end up having a sexuality. Now, see, I hope I don't sound puritanical, but that we could end up having a sexuality that lacks intimacy and lacks closeness and lacks love based on the exposure that they're getting through pornography. What's your thoughts on that?
Oh, dear Lord. That is the hot seat, isn't it? So there are so many pieces to that question. One of the pieces that stood out for me was, do I think that these rape videos and correct me if I'm wrong, but the question was, do I think the rape videos, et cetera, are okay in general? Was that part of the question?
No. Do you think that rape and gangbanging and that kind of pornography can become the erotica of the future? Because so many people will become desensitized and or they will be sensitized to that in their own arousal template.
I think we're in a gigantic human experiment right now with the internet and with porn. And there are studies that show desensitization around, video games and violence. However, there's also studies that show that it within the template of that person to become violent or not violent. I do not have the research background to answer that with any kind of adequate, I think, words. My gut tells me that if you're dealing with a young mind, first of all, I do believe in sexual addiction, and I do believe that pornography is a huge piece of sexual addiction because it is so accessible and because kids so young are getting their hands on it, and people don't typically, the people that I've seen, they don't just start watching gangbangs and they don't just start watching rape. They start watching regular porn and regular, whatever is regular, but just classic, hetero or homosexual porn and whatever they prefer, And so from there, picking up hours, at a time, and then you're not getting the same high, so then you're going to harder and harder materials. And so that's typically how people that come to see me end up in these sites or in the hardcore porn. And do I think that it could shape the mind in their template? I mean, it would seem logical, that it would impact as it's creating this addictive piece, that it's on a physiological level starting to help regulate their system in a way,
Right.
So this is, in the most unacademic way, that is my answer. You know,
well,
like
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said we don't have research yet to substantiate that. And
we don't. We do
right,
have
and
research
so hopefully we will, so that we can know. And so I appreciate that very honest answer about that. I knew I was kind of. We had not talked about that question, but it is something that I'm worried about. Only in that, for me, what I know to be true is sexual addiction in and of itself is an intimacy disorder, and so. I 100% agree with you that, role play that looks angry or controlling can be erotic, and that in and of itself is not a problem. However, I do believe when people are only able to have sex via those kinds of activity, it does not necessarily lend itself to intimacy. Now, you might argue, how do we know? I mean, how do you know that couple isn't as intimate and loving and caring outside of the bedroom as they need to be? And I guess I'd have to say, I don't know that. Do you have a feeling either way?
I tend to think that a relationship, whether it is if it's too heavy in one area and severely lacking in another, it feels unbalanced to me. So I would tend to say, again, it would be by the report of the couple, but I would question if there is if there's absolutely no emotional intimacy, or there's no I would look at the level of emotional intimacy, because maybe they genuinely are happy with not having any gentle physical intimacy, but maybe emotionally they're also not close, and that could be a challenge.
Right, and I do believe you and I see skewed couples. I mean, I have definitely met couples that like rough sex, or like a lot of bondage, or like submissive, dominant behaviors in their sexuality, or play out anger. And they do have problems with emotional intimacy, but that's why they're in our office. We're not looking at those kind of couples that don't have that.
Right. I would. There are so many good writers on online pornography and sexual addiction. One that comes to my mind is Rob Weiss. He has written tons of stuff on online pornography and its impact on the system, the nervous system. So I would check that out.
Yes, and we've had Rob on the show. He's a good friend of the show, and he is one of the most non-judgmental. Don't take a theory and just plant it on a couple because you're not comfortable with it.
Right.
And he, very open-minded, and obviously clients can really feel like they can bring in issues and they won't get judged. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of clinicians tend to do. They judge. So now let me ask you something else. Do you believe that sexualized anger is a way that people regulate their moods?
I do. I think that it is one way. And I was pleasantly surprised to read a really awesome quote from Alex Katahakis. She came out with a book of sexual addiction and affect regulation, which is emotional regulation, I think about 1.5 years ago. And so there's this really great quote from there that says, acting out sexually means precisely that. The person attempts to regulate feelings, predominantly rage, at the offending gender by unconsciously acting them out in a mime language of sex, with fantasy, ritual, and orgasm being the auto-regulating reward. So what she's saying, essentially, if I may be so bold as to paraphrase her, is that unconsciously acting out through sex, people are auto-regulating using fantasy, ritual, and orgasm.
And so fantasy, ritual, and orgasm help them to act out their sex. And she obviously is an emotion regulation specialist. Mm-hmm. And so if I understand you correctly, it is a way to regulate affect.
Yes, it is one way of people can choose to, or if they can't choose if they're addicted, but they're kind of out of control with that. But it is one way to calm or soothe. It would be same kind of effect as cutting.
Yeah, and so let's talk to our listening audience a little bit about that, because my experience is that there are some people that choose to cut for attention. There are other people that choose to cut so that they can feel what internally is going on inside of themselves emotionally and physiologically. And when they cut, they feel the feelings externally. They watch the blood. They feel the pain, and it is congruent with how they feel inside. Now, how would you describe that?
Well, I would describe it just the way you did.
Okay.
I've worked with cutting. I don't specialize in cutting, but that's what I would have said about cutting. It's trying to feel what's inside. It's trying to show other people what you're feeling, or get reflection on what you're feeling by getting other people's responses. And it's also a numbing, just to completely numb out and to not feel at all.
Yeah, that's a good point. It also has it can have that opposite effect, which does the exact same thing. It helps to regulate emotions.
Mhm. Yeah, you go completely flat.
Right. Mm-hmm. Well, that was a good comparison, because people are finding out more and more about teens, and I actually have a lot of young and middle-aged adults that cut. Because again, a lot of people have not been taught how to regulate emotions, how to self-soothe, how to acknowledge and validate their emotions, and so they find what I consider maladaptive ways. I do believe cutting is absolutely positively maladaptive, and at the same time, I'm never as worried about the cutting as other professionals, whether that would be a principal, a teacher, a parent, a spouse. Because what I know is we just have to figure out another way to bring to the forefront the feelings the person is having, and have them acknowledged, validated, and then find self-soothing, some sort of self-soothing coping mechanism to help.
Yeah, I find that I think that's going to be one of my next projects. I find cutting really fascinating as a regulatory thing, and why it just has become so much more prevalent. Before, I'm hoping to be able to touch, if we can, on this idea of recovering from sexualized anger, because I find that sometimes when I give these talks, I don't give enough about recovery, and then I get feedback of like, that was so depressing, and how am I going to ever get better?
Okay.
So the two things that Patrick Carnes actually talked about for recovering sexualized anger would be looking at the arousal template, so really picking apart what turns you on, and at the same time looking at family of origin issues or trauma, and trying to see if you can find connections within those. And then I also add this idea of slowing down the nervous system in your affect, and really opening your window of tolerance a bit, and so that you can slow down the behaviors that you're doing over and over again and see if it really is serving you or if you can find a different way to regulate in those moments.
So now, if you would, talk about a patient or a client that you've worked with that you had to do exactly that, help them process and slow it down. Tell me a little bit about their background.
Okay. I primarily work with women, so a lot of my cases are with women. And I work a lot with escorts, and so let's think. What I generally do is I have people. There is this exercise called the iceberg exercise from Patrick Carnes, which is a very simple exercise where you plot out, what is your anger and your history of anger and family origin issues around anger. And so you just want to go deeper and deeper and deeper into the history and the patterns of your anger and what really sets you off. And then you want to look at, I try to do like tandem, looking at your arousal template and what really turns you on. And then I literally have them start looking back and forth at these two things and seeing if anything comes up. We just read the list of each one, and then, I provide feedback, reflecting if they have any kind of interesting body language happening with anything. And then, as this is all happening, it depends on how fast we can go in these sessions, because sometimes people get really worked up. They get really activated. And so I have to use grounding techniques, and this would be, the number 3, tools for slowing down. So this would be teaching grounding techniques and teaching how to get back into the window of tolerance so we can process some more. Because once you're out of that window, the front brain goes offline and you can't do any processing. So that's generally what treatment looks like for someone coming in with specifically sexualized anger.
So again, if somebody comes to you and they realize that they're not comfortable with their anger and that they have in some way created a pattern where they are acting out their anger via sex, you would do a full assessment and you'd identify, other ways that they might regulate their emotions, and then help them to determine, is this something that they really want to work on? And then what would you do next?
I would probably go through an example. Let them lead me through a recent example or a historical example of something that stuck out with them, kind of like a snapshot. I sometimes integrate, that snapshot piece of EMDR, just like where do you feel it in your body and what's happening in that moment, and having them go back there in that moment while also being in the room, and then just process, what is it about that one example that's really hurting them, that is dystonic with them.
Mm-hmm. And again, for our listening audience, when Jess talks about dystonic, it means that it's something that you're doing or experiencing, feeling that doesn't feel congruent with who you are. So a lot of times people will come in, and that is at the source of their pain, is that they're doing something that they don't like. I know sometimes I'll meet with bisexual or homosexual clients that they say, I don't want to be homosexual. Please help me with this. And, of course, I don't do any kind of aversive therapy, so we explore what is it that you don't like about it, what are you most afraid of, and kind of talk them through that process so that they better understand, how can they either accept it or how can they move around it to some degree and live a happy life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So now, how can people get more information on sexualized anger?
There's some, like I said, there's actually some really great articles. If you just Google sexualized anger, another writer that comes to mind is Aaron, I think his name is, and he's out of New York, I believe. They can go to my site, east-baytherapy.com, and I have, I did a lecture for the Center for Healthy Sex this year on sexualized anger, so they can watch that. You know, you could always buy the book Perversion. It's quite a good read.
Okay, and so if they go to your website, and again, that is www.east-baytherapy.com, and you said you have what available to people?
There is a video on there that they can click on, which is a lecture that I provided for the Center for Healthy Sex, which is out of Los Angeles. And it's a video, a free video, and they can just watch it. It's about an hour.
Fantastic.
It's on sexualized anger.
There you go. So if we have, if our listening audience is wondering if they understand this concept and they feel like they may have sexualized anger and they're not particularly comfortable with it, you can go, again, to www.east-baytherapy.com and listen to Jess talk about this really important subject. And you did it for the Center for Healthy Sex, and it was really well attended, wasn't it?
I don't know. I think I'm not gonna toot a horn.
All right. Well, I had talked with Alex, and she was really pleased with the subject matter and the inquiries she got. So there you go. I'm plugging you. And how can my listeners contact you if they want more information about your work and especially your work with women?
Yeah, so you go to that same place, east-baytherapy.com, and you can just fill out a consultation form, and I will get back with you within 24 hours.
Perfect. Well, I know that this is a topic that not a lot of therapists know much about, and the only thing that we've been trained as CSATs is to understand about eroticized rage, and obviously sexualized anger is very different. So I'm so happy that you shared the differences between both. I love that you don't pathologize it, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about the talks that you give, the articles that you write, and that book that's probably rumbling around in your head right now.
Oh, one day.
All right. Well, Jess, thank you so much, and I really appreciate your expertise, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me, Carol.
All right. You have a great week.
Okay, bye.
Bye. So, again, that was Jess Levith, and she is a licensed marriage and family therapy trained by the Society for the Advancement of Sexual Health. And she obviously is a CSAT. She is an APSAT. She works with partner trauma, and she has just made it her own. And I really admire someone who wants to be there for you when there are uncomfortable topics that you may want a specialist to help you deal with. And so it's the end of the show, and you and I both know that there will only be one of you at all times. So I fearlessly want you to have the courage to be yourself, and this is the place where you can get information that you can apply to yourself and find out who the experts are in the world to take your life to the next level. So we'll see you next week. Talk to you soon.